I still remember the moment as if it happened yesterday. I was arranging dried herbs in the apothecary's back room, savoring the earthy scent of lavender mingling with rosemary, when Dominic, the heir to Blackwood Herbals and son of its founder, appeared in the doorway. His presence immediately changed the atmosphere. The peaceful sanctuary became charged with tension. Maya, I need to see you in my office, now. It wasn't a request. I had devoted 9 years to Blackwood Herbals. In that time, I had developed our signature healing blends from scratch, established relationships with organic farmers across 3 counties, and trained nearly every apprentice who now worked in our main workshop. But none of that seemed to matter to Dominic. His mother, Eleanor Blackwood, had built this business with wisdom and compassion. Dominic had merely inherited the title and apparently thought it gave him the right to rule like a medieval lord. I followed him down the hallway lined with pressed botanicals in antique frames, trying to quiet the growing unease in my chest. He didn't even sit down. "You're fired," he said, voice flat and emotionless. "We don't need deadweight like you dragging this place down." I blinked, at first thinking it must be some kind of cruel joke. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," he replied, casually flipping through a pile of invoices as if deciding what to have for lunch. "You can collect your things and leave, effective immediately." I stood there, stunned. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wanted to shout, to defend myself, to demand an explanation, but instead I smiled, a calm, polite, deliberate smile. "Understood," I said. "Have a nice day, Dominic." I walked out of his office with my head high, but inside I was trembling. My fellow herbalists glanced up as I passed, sensing something was wrong. A few started to rise, ready to ask questions, but I gave them a subtle shake of my head. "Don't make this harder." I packed my small wooden chest in silence. As I drove home along the winding country roads, memories flooded my mind. 9 years. 9. I had given this apothecary more time than I had given my own family, working late nights, blending remedies during holidays, taking consultations while fighting back tears after my sister's death. I had given them everything, and now I was dismissed as if I were nothing. But I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was curious. Why? That question haunted me all night. I barely slept. Something about the way Dominic had said it, so confidently, so carelessly, didn't sit right. The timing was strange, too. We were about to finalize one of the apothecary's most significant partnerships, a collaboration with Cypress Wellness Center that I had spent 4 months preparing. I knew their philosophy inside and out. I had even scheduled the final contract signing for that Friday. And now I was gone. Had he even looked at our proprietary formulations that were part of the agreement? The next morning, just after 9, my phone chimed. I didn't recognize the number. I let it ring, unsure if I could handle another blow, but curiosity won again. "Maya? It's Eleanor." The voice sent a jolt down my spine, the true spirit of Blackwood Herbals, the woman who had hired me 9 years ago after watching me identify 20 healing plants blindfolded. "I just arrived at the workshop," she continued, and I could hear the tightness in her throat. "Why are your herbs packed away? What happened?" I hesitated. "Your son fired me." Silence. Then, with a sharp inhale, "What?" "Yesterday. He said I was lazy and that I wasn't needed anymore." There was a long pause before she spoke again, this time slowly, as if trying to contain her fury. "Maya, did he read your contract?" I furrowed my brows. "What do you mean?" "He's supposed to finalize the Cypress partnership today, isn't he?" "Yes, we were scheduled to meet them at 11. Good Lord. I could hear papers rustling in the background, then a loud thud, as if she'd slammed something on her desk. "Maya, your contract has a special clause," she said. "One I insisted on after the Thornfield fiasco. You're not just the lead herbalist, you're the only authorized formulator for the Cypress partnership." I froze. "He can't close the deal without you," Eleanor continued. "Not legally, not ethically, not even practically. That partnership will disintegrate unless you're there." A slow, burning realization settled in my chest. He hadn't read it. Dominic had no idea what he'd done. And that's when something inside me shifted. The betrayal still hurt, yes, but now I felt something else entirely. Control. He had pulled the trigger far too quickly, and now the gun was pointed at himself. Eleanor hung up without another word. I could feel her fury through the silence that followed. I sat motionless and listened in my cottage, herbal tea growing cold beside me, staring at nothing in particular. She didn't know her son had fired me without even reading the contract. I leaned back in my chair and let out a quiet, bitter laugh. After 9 years, this was it. Undone by a spoiled, impulsive man-child trying to play business owner, making decisions as if they were moves in a video game. But real businesses don't respawn after bad calls, and this one was about to learn that the hard way. I wasn't sure what would happen next. Part of me wanted to get dressed and show up at the workshop just to watch the fallout unfold. But another part, the one that had endured years of thankless overtime and swallowed my pride more times than I could count, wanted to let them burn. I didn't have to wait long. At 10:13 a.m., I got another call. This time it was Dominic. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, another call, this one from our front desk, then our legal advisor, then our bookkeeper. I stared at my phone as it buzzed nonstop, lighting up like a Yule tree. I didn't answer a single one. The voicemail icon blinked at me relentlessly. I tapped it open. "Maya, hi, it's Dominic." His voice was strained. "Listen, there was a misunderstanding yesterday. I might have acted too fast. We need you back today. It's urgent. Please call me." Urgent. The word rolled around in my head like a marble in a glass bowl. He hadn't said sorry, not once, not even in a fake, polite way. Instead, it was panic disguised as politeness. I took a sip of my cold tea, still not moving from my chair. At 10:32, my phone buzzed again. This time, a number I hadn't saved in years. Rowan, a former colleague. We'd grown close back when she was in my department before she transferred to our educational programs. I picked up. "Maya, you won't believe what's happening here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Try me." Dominic just got eviscerated by his mother, like in front of everyone. The consultation room was full. Eleanor walked in and slammed the Cypress contract on the table. I raised an eyebrow. "She brought the contract?" "Oh, yeah. And she asked just one question. 'Did you read this before firing Maya?' And Dominic tried to bluff, said something about moving in a new direction and reevaluating roles. But Eleanor didn't buy it. She flipped to the clause you always talked about, the one that says you're the sole formulator on the Cypress account. That clause was there for a reason. She paused for a moment. I could hear workshop murmurs in the background. "Maya, he looked pale, like ghost pale. He realized he's the reason Cypress is about to walk." I exhaled slowly. "And what did Eleanor say?" "She told him if the partnership falls through, his position here becomes negotiable." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. There it was, the first crack in Dominic's armor. "I don't know what you're planning," Rowan added, "but whatever it is, you have the upper hand now." I ended the call with a soft thank you, then stood and looked out the window at my herb garden. The lavender was quiet still. I always found comfort in that. Nature, indifferent to human chaos, growing as usual. At 11:15, another message came through, this time from Eleanor herself. "Maya, I'm sincerely sorry for what happened. I misjudged the situation. Please come in, not just for the partnership, but so we can talk privately." It was tempting, but I wasn't ready to just walk back in like nothing had happened. Not yet. Dominic's mistake wasn't just about a contract. It was about respect, about trust, and about the years I had given. Years that couldn't be replaced by a panicked phone call and a seat at a negotiation table. Still, something stirred inside me. I wasn't a petty person, but I wasn't weak either. I didn't want revenge. I wanted accountability. I picked up my phone and finally responded, not with a call, but a message. "I'll consider returning to finalize the Cypress partnership, but only under specific conditions. I'd like to speak with Eleanor directly beforehand." I hit send, then changed out of my gardening clothes and began to prepare. By the time I arrived at the apothecary, it was just past noon. I didn't use the staff entrance. I walked through the main shop like a customer, a move I knew would draw attention. Everyone knew I had been fired the day before. My return now was more than a quiet comeback. It was a statement. The shop assistant stood up the moment she saw me. "Miss Gardner? Maya?" she stammered. "Eleanor is expecting you. Right this way." As I followed her through the workshop, I noticed the atmosphere had changed. People looked up from their mortar and pestles, conversations paused. There was a sense of quiet tension, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Eleanor was standing at the door to her office when I arrived. She wasn't smiling. Maya, she said, nodding. Thank you for coming in. I nodded back, but didn't extend my hand. She stepped aside, letting me walk past her into the office. It was quiet for a moment as I took a seat across from her desk, adorned with dried botanicals and ancient herbals. She closed the door behind her, leaned against it, and let out a long sigh. I made a mistake, she began. A big one. I gave my son too much authority too fast. I wanted him to prove himself, but I didn't expect him to burn bridges before even learning how to build them. I stayed silent. She sat down, her voice softening. What he did to you was unprofessional, disrespectful, and frankly, it jeopardized a partnership we've worked over half a year to secure. I nodded slowly. Yes, it did. I read the contract again this morning. Every word. You were given full autonomy over the Cypress account. Legally, they won't recognize anyone else as a formulation expert during this collaboration. That clause was put in place after the Thornfield debacle. I remember it well. So do I, she said quietly. You were the one who managed the fallout. Her eyes met mine. You didn't deserve what happened yesterday, she said, and I'd like to offer you your position back with full authority to finish the partnership. Whatever conditions you need, we'll make them work. There was sincerity in her tone, regret too, but this wasn't just about the partnership. It was about leadership, accountability, dignity. I'll return, I said, but I want everything in writing. A revised contract, clear autonomy over Cypress, and no interference from Dominic. She nodded immediately. Done. And one more thing, I added, voice firm. This can't happen again. Not to me, not to anyone. A weighty silence followed. Then she gave me a slow, thoughtful nod. You have my word. With that, I stood. The moment I stepped out of her office, I could see Dominic standing down the hall, arms crossed, pretending to be deep in conversation with a junior herbalist, but his eyes locked on mine the second I appeared. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I walked straight past him, and I swear, for a second, I saw the exact moment he realized his control was slipping. By 1 p.m., the consultation room was ready. The Cypress team had just arrived, and we had about 30 minutes before the official meeting. I reviewed the formulations one last time, confirming all the points we had previously agreed upon. Dr. Chen, Cypress's founder, was a no-nonsense woman with sharp instincts. She valued trust above all, and any hint of internal disorganization would send her running. As I placed our handcrafted sampler kit onto the table, I caught sight of Dominic pacing outside the glass walls of the meeting room like a caged animal. Eleanor stepped out to intercept him. Their muffled voices escalated quickly until Eleanor's hand shot up, silencing him. Dominic's face turned crimson. He looked over his shoulder at me with a mix of rage and humiliation. Then he walked away. That was the last time I saw him that day. At 1:30 sharp, Dr. Chen entered with her team. I greeted her warmly, and her stern expression softened slightly, a rare gesture from her. You brought the customized blend we discussed? She asked. I opened the wooden box, revealing 7 small amber bottles, including the modifications for your integrative therapy program. The meeting began. It went flawlessly. 2 hours later, we shook hands and signed the partnership agreement. After they left, Eleanor approached me again, this time her face showing genuine relief. You saved us, she said. And I owe you more than an apology. You owe your business a leader, I replied, one who knows the difference between power and responsibility. She didn't argue. Later that evening, as I walked to my car, the tension I'd carried for the past 48 hours finally began to lift. I had come back not as an employee, but as someone who understood her value and demanded it be recognized. But I also knew this wasn't over. Dominic might have been quiet today, but men like him don't disappear. They retreat, and then they retaliate. By the following week, the Cypress Partnership had made headlines in our regional wellness publication. Breakthrough in Integrative Medicine, Blackwood Herbals secures historic partnership with Cypress Wellness through innovative formulations. They didn't mention me by name, but everyone at Blackwood knew who had sealed that partnership. My inbox was flooded with quiet congratulations, messages from staff who had stayed silent during the storm. Some were from apprentices I'd mentored years ago, others from colleagues who had once ignored my suggestions in meetings, but now praised my leadership under pressure. I appreciated their words, but I wasn't naive. I knew how quickly people shift when the wind changes direction. The mood around the workshop had lightened. There was laughter again in the drawing room. Eleanor had made it clear Dominic was no longer involved in high-level decisions until further notice. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Small things began to happen. First, it was the supply orders. Ingredients I had requested for upcoming formulations were delayed. Then formulations I had submitted for approval were returned to me unsigned without explanation. Next, an email I never sent, allegedly from my address, was flagged by our tech support. It contained incorrect measurements for a sensitive formulation and had been forwarded to one of our healthcare partners. Luckily, the pharmacist was someone I had a good relationship with, and she reached out directly to clarify, but the mistake had already planted doubt. I reported it to our systems administrator. He said there was no sign of external tampering. The message had originated from inside our network. That's when I knew Dominic was behind it. He was no longer trying to fire me. That approach had failed. Now he wanted to make me look incompetent, to smear my reputation slowly, subtly, until I either quit in frustration or someone else decided I was a liability. It was classic character sabotage, and it wasn't the first time I'd seen it. Back at my first position, fresh out of herbalism school, I worked under a mentor who played the same game. He wouldn't confront you directly, but he'd cut off your resources, isolate you from projects, quietly poison your name until the only option left was to disappear. But I wasn't that naive apprentice anymore. I wasn't going to disappear. I documented everything, every missed email, every mistake I hadn't made, every delay. I had learned the hard way that paper trails are more powerful than emotions in environments like this. I even started using a private journal, logging times, dates, conversations, just in case. Then one afternoon, I overheard something that confirmed my suspicions. I was passing the consultation room when I heard Dominic's voice inside, too loud for a private discussion. "She's unstable," he said. "Since she came back, she's been erratic, aggressive. I don't think she's fit to manage high-profile clients." I stopped in my tracks. "I'm just saying," he continued, "maybe we should start thinking about succession planning for the formulation department. She's clearly overextended." Another voice responded, someone I didn't recognize, a newer consultant maybe. But the Cypress partnership? She pulled that off under serious pressure. Dominic scoffed. "She got lucky. We can't run a business on luck." I stood frozen for a few moments, then quietly walked away, my blood running cold, not out of fear, but from the icy precision of his tactics. He was planting seeds again, poisoning the well. That evening, I stayed late. The workshop was quiet, the rooms dim. I sat alone in the glass consultation room, staring at the moonlight filtering through jars of dried herbs, wondering how many more battles I would have to fight just to keep doing my job. And then a voice broke the silence. "Still here?" I looked up. It was Eleanor. "I could ask you the same," I replied. She stepped inside, placed a folder on the table. "Your revised contract with everything we agreed on." I opened it, read through the language. It was solid. I nodded in approval. "I've also started an internal investigation," she added. "Too many things have been misfiled lately." I looked up sharply. She met my gaze. "I'm not blind, Maya. I know Dominic isn't finished." "Why haven't you stopped him?" I asked. There was a long pause before she answered. "Because I needed to see how far he'd go." She sounded tired, more like a mother than a business owner in that moment. "You're protecting the business," I said. She shook her head slowly. "I'm trying to protect both of you, but maybe it's too late for one of you." I closed the folder. "I don't need protection. I need you to decide what kind of legacy you want to leave behind." Her eyes lingered on mine, then she turned and left, and I knew something bigger was coming. The workshop felt colder that week, not because of the weather, but because the air between people had changed. Conversations dropped to whispers when I walked by. Some colleagues smiled at me, others avoided eye contact altogether. The internal investigation had begun, and everyone knew it. People were nervous. So was I. I hadn't asked Eleanor to launch an investigation, but deep down, I was relieved that she had. I needed the truth out in the open, not just for me, but for everyone who had been walking on eggshells since Dominic took over. Still, I knew how this game worked in family businesses. Truth doesn't always lead to justice, Sometimes it leads to quiet exits and generous severance packages. Sometimes it's buried so deep behind tradition that the damage becomes irreversible. That Thursday, I was called into the investigation committee's temporary office, an old storage room turned evidence collection center. Records were stacked on tables, computer screens glowed with data, and a whiteboard was filled with timelines and digital breadcrumbs. James, the lead investigator, greeted me. Maya, thanks for coming in. We'd like to ask you a few questions about some recent irregularities. I nodded and took a seat. He pulled up a file on the screen. First, this email that appeared to be from your account. We've confirmed it was sent from a shared computer near the drying room. The credentials were manually entered. So someone had my login? I asked. He shook his head. No, someone had your credentials, copied them most likely. This wasn't random, it was internal. I folded my arms. I reported that incident the day it happened. He gave a tight smile. Yes, and we're glad you did. We found a few others like it, emails rewritten, formulations altered, approvals removed, always traced to shared workstations, always under your name. The weight in my chest grew heavier. This was coordinated, I said. James hesitated. Yes, and we've narrowed down the list of people who had access. We've also noticed unusual patterns linked to Dominic's assistant's login. I sat still. He continued carefully. We're not accusing anyone yet, but there's a clear pattern, sabotage intended to discredit you and possibly others. I clenched my jaw. So what happens now? That's where it gets complicated, he said. Eleanor asked us to present our findings directly to her. She's made it clear she wants the truth. All of it, no filters. I nodded slowly. Then I'll be there. James raised his eyebrows. You're not required. I will be there, I repeated. If this is going to surface, I want to look everyone in the eye. He didn't argue. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the others who had left quietly over the past year. Talented herbalists in their 30s and 40s who had simply moved on without much notice. People who had once been considered rising stars. I used to think it was just turnover. Now I wondered how many of them had been quietly pushed out by Dominic's games. I arrived early to the conference room the next morning. Eleanor was already there, staring out the window like a woman waiting for the final card to fall. James and 2 other investigators came in next. Then Dominic arrived 10 minutes late, looking smug, phone in hand, not a trace of concern on his face, until he saw me. He paused at the door. She's not on the investigation committee. Eleanor didn't turn. She's here at my request. Dominic shifted his weight uncomfortably. This is supposed to be internal, confidential. Then you should have kept it that way when you used company resources to fabricate emails, I said, my voice calm but sharp. Dominic scoffed. That's ridiculous. James spoke up. We've traced multiple login attempts tied to your assistant's account, all connected to irregularities targeting Maya's work. There's a clear timeline. Dominic's face began to shift, his practiced smugness cracking. You're reaching. She's just bitter about being let go. I looked him in the eye. You didn't let me go, Dominic. You sabotaged me, and you almost tanked the biggest partnership this apothecary has landed in 5 years. Eleanor finally turned. I gave you a chance, she said quietly. I gave you more than one, and you've done nothing but tear down the people trying to build something real here. Dominic's bravado faltered. This isn't what you think. No, Eleanor cut in. It's worse. A heavy silence filled the room. Then Eleanor stood. The board will be reviewing this report. Until then, you are suspended, effective immediately. Dominic opened his mouth to protest, but the words never came. He looked at me one last time, this time not with rage, but with disbelief, like he had finally realized that none of his usual tricks were going to save him now. He walked out in silence. I stayed behind. Eleanor exhaled, her shoulders sagging. I failed him, she said, as a leader and maybe as a mother. You can't lead someone who refuses to grow, I said quietly, but you can lead this business. You still have that choice. She looked at me, then nodded, and for the first time since this all began, I felt the weight start to lift. 2 weeks had passed since the investigation meeting, but the impact of that morning still echoed through every corner of the building. Dominic hadn't returned, and the once proud smirk he carried like a badge was now the stuff of whispered workshop gossip. The board moved quickly. The evidence was too strong, too detailed, too damning to ignore. The falsified emails, the login traces, the unexplained disappearance of formulation records, the attempt to weaponize performance reviews, all under Dominic's direction or through people he manipulated. When the final report came out, it was clear Dominic hadn't just tried to sabotage me. He had compromised the integrity of the business itself. His suspension became a termination. The official announcement cited breaches of ethical conduct and internal misconduct. No lawsuits, no press release, just a quiet exit through the back door of family business history. But word spread anyway. I thought I'd feel triumphant when I heard the news. Instead, I felt calm, not victorious, just steady, like I had weathered the storm and now I could finally breathe. A few days later, Eleanor called me into her office and closed the door. "Did he leave?" I asked. She nodded. She sat at her desk, a folder in front of her, but she didn't open it yet. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about everything that's happened," she began, "and what I want this apothecary to be moving forward." I didn't speak. I let her finish. "You've shown more leadership in the past month than most owners show in a career. You protected our biggest partnership, held your composure through public humiliation, and navigated personal attacks with professionalism. That's the kind of person I want helping run this business." She slid the folder across the desk. Inside was a promotion letter. Director of Formulation and Innovation, a leadership role, one that reported directly to her. I looked up, startled. "I didn't ask for this." "I know," she said. "That's why you deserve it." I hesitated, then gave her a small nod. "If I accept this, I want a say in how we move forward. I don't want to just hold a title. I want to rebuild this culture the right way." She smiled. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." Later that evening, as I sat alone in my new office, a temporary one while renovations were underway, I stared at the blank nameplate on the door. For years, I'd walked these halls wondering if anyone really saw the work I did. The late nights, the client saves, the innovations I created without a single word of credit. I thought staying quiet was the best way to keep peace, to not cause friction. But silence had almost cost me everything. It wasn't just about a contract or a position. It was about remembering that competence is not arrogance, and professionalism is not weakness. I had been underestimated, dismissed, and sabotaged, but I had never been defeated, and I hadn't let myself become bitter in the process. That, to me, was the real win. In the weeks that followed, I started reshaping the department. I reopened lines of communication. I created mentorship opportunities for talented herbalists who had been overlooked. I established an anonymous feedback system so no one else had to fear retaliation for speaking up. I even made time for the younger apprentices who were just starting out, some of whom had witnessed what I went through and quietly asked how I stayed strong. I told them the truth. "You don't always get to pick the battles," I said, "but you do get to decide who you become in the middle of them." As for Dominic, last I heard, he was interviewing at smaller apothecaries out of state, but his reputation had caught up to him. Some said Eleanor pulled strings to make sure his name didn't get dragged publicly. Maybe that was a mother's last act of love. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. One afternoon, while walking through the workshop, I passed the glass wall of the consultation room that once housed the Cyprus negotiation. I paused for a moment, remembering everything: the sabotage, the call, the panic, the eventual triumph. That single partnership had changed the course of my career. But the real shift happened the moment I smiled at Dominic and walked out of his office, refusing to beg. That was the turning point, not because I gave up, but because I knew what I was worth, and I refused to let anyone, founder's son or not, take that from me ever again.